I spent a night in a Mongolian ghost forest. I'll never be the same. Original report by Primary Gap, with further research and edits by the Facts and Fiction. Night Drive footage generously provided by Jade Widow Drives. Hey, how are you? It's really good to see you again. Sorry I couldn't make last week's drive work. I needed to take a mental health week, but I'm feeling a lot better now. So, first and foremost, I'm glad our last drive story about that crawler thing from Boone County didn't scare you off. Oh, also, I checked in with Roger and he's doing fine. He's had a few more encounters and he actually went on a podcast talking about some of his experiences, including something attacking his camper. Spooky stuff for sure. But he's doing alright and just bought a trail cam to try and catch whatever's doing it in the act. The podcast is called Beyond the Woodline if you want to listen for yourself, and I definitely recommend you do. It's really good. Second, I reached out to some friends and asked about their experiences, and I've got some really interesting stories to share with you coming up. For tonight's drive, however, we're crossing the pond again and taking a look at a truly bizarre experience my friend Naran had a few months back when he was visiting his home country of Mongolia. This one has all the right ingredients to make your skin crawl, but it's also one of the most unique and, non-cliche type encounters. I honestly haven't ever heard anything quite like it, and that's part of why it's so interesting to me. The closest thing to it that I have heard would probably be certain missing 411 cases I've read where people were found but recounted being lost in a time or place that simply doesn't match the world that continued on without them. So, feel free to lean your seat back, turn your butt warmer on, and let me tell you about the ghost forest of Mongolia. Hi. My name is Naran Batar, or Naran. I'm a man in my 20s, originally from Mongolia, but I've spent most of my adult life in Europe. I generally think of myself as a very logical person. I don't believe in ghosts, demons, magic, or most other supernatural topics. Maybe the closest thing to the paranormal that I do believe in would be alien life forms living in places besides Earth. But I don't even know if I'd say they've visited us or are super advanced or anything. More so just that the universe is a pretty big place, and it's hard to think at the very least some bacteria or even animals haven't evolved out there somewhere. But I don't really know how controversial or paranormal that really is. Growing up, I also never had a fear of darkness. Where lots of kids might have a nightlight to help them sleep, I actually would actively seek the darkness out. As a kid, I remember delving into any dark basement or abandoned building without hesitation, and kids around my age were always impressed with how brave I was. Hell, even I thought I was brave. I guess not brave in the pick a fight with someone sort of way. I just was completely unfazed by the things that go bump in the night, so to speak. I guess my only real fear growing up, and even into my adulthood, was of people with malicious intent. That is to say, until a year ago, in the spring of 2023. I had recently returned to my home country of Mongolia after studying abroad. My grandparents picked me up from the airport, excited to show me their new house and help me find a photo album I'd left with them when I left for university. Their new house sits in a beautiful yet very secluded area in the mountains, a few hours' drive from the Chinggis Khan International Airport. I fell asleep in the back seat along the way, Anyone who's flown a long international flight home will know there's a special type of tired you get that just doesn't come from anywhere else. They let me sleep and didn't wake me up until we had pulled up right outside of their house. It was around 11 p.m., and being a few hours outside the city and with some clouds covering the moon and stars, it was pitch black. No city light, no neighbors, no street lights, not even anything from the moon or stars thanks to a thick layer of clouds. It was truly, completely just black, with the only light source being the headlights of my grandparents' car illuminating the front of the house. I stepped out of the car and stretched my legs and back, surprised at just how crisp and clean the night air felt after years of living in nothing but cities. It was late spring, heading into summer, so there were lots of crickets and bugs out, which was also a really nice change from the city. I heard the boot of the car closing behind me and turned to see my grandpa had pulled my luggage from the car and smiled excitedly, gesturing up towards my grandma, who had just opened the front door and turned on a porch light. A second point of light, now in an otherwise empty, dark void. We went inside and they eagerly showed me around their new home, for my grandmother left to warm up a dinner portion they'd made for me earlier, and I got settled into my new room. Being so far up in the mountains, there wasn't any cell phone service, so I asked them for their Wi-Fi password so I could text a childhood friend of mine named Altan so we could meet up. Despite it being so late at night, I was super jet-lagged, and my nap in the car left me feeling surprisingly refreshed. Altan and I had also not seen each other in ages, so we were really excited to see each other despite how late it was. I sent him my location, and he said it would take about 2 hours for him to get to me. So I filled the time chatting with my grandparents, eating the dinner they'd made for me, and basically just catching up. Around 12:30, they said they were going to bed, but left me a house key and told me there was some beer inside the fridge. Basically just normal welcome home type stuff. And everything felt normal. Altan was still an hour away, so I went to the fridge and grabbed a few of the aforementioned beers and figured I'd have them while sitting out on the porch and enjoying a smoke. I stepped out onto the porch and damn, I'd forgotten just how black it was outside. Like staring into an empty void. No stars, no moon. I guess the clouds from above were still just as thick as ever, and it honestly took me a second to adjust to how intensely dark the world could get away from civilization. And despite how dark it was also loud. There were absolute tons of insects and crickets chirping away in the evening, and just general natural nightlife roaming about. I sat back for a while with my smoke and a beer, just enjoying the calming night sounds. It was honestly like the best ambience before bed type video ever, but it was real life, and I wanted to take time to appreciate it. Finishing up my second beer, I stood up and figured I'd indulge myself with a bit more immersion in nature before Altan should be here to pick me up. I put my beer can down and walked out into the darkness, not going more than a few meters before realizing that just across from the porch and surrounding my grandparents' property, there was actually a forest. Literally an entire forest that had been hiding behind the sheet of darkness, and it struck me how funny it was that something like that was even possible. Like, damn, if Nikola Tesla was never born, this is how the whole world would look like, huh? It was honestly impressive, and instantly made me remember all of those times exploring dark places as a kid. Now, truly excited, I continued walking around the edge of the forest, and just deep enough that I could no longer see the lights from my grandparents' house. And, just like that, I was alone. Totally engulfed in complete darkness. To many, this may sound horrifying, but to be honest, it was kind of relaxing. All those memories and feelings of being safe in the darkness where others were too afraid to go sort of washed over me, and I was shocked at how it felt so peaceful. I'd honestly forgotten how much I enjoyed this, and it was amazing to just sit, almost floating in the void, and even strain my ears and still not hear a single car honking in the distance, no dogs barking, no leaves blowing on the ground, no crickets, no animals scurrying through the underbrush. Wait. I realized then that this wasn't peaceful, it was too peaceful, too quiet. As much as I enjoyed the break from the normal city noises I'd grown accustomed to, when I first got out of the car, there were bugs buzzing. The night was full of nature sounds, and that was the same as when I was sitting out on the porch. Now, though, it was nothing. I could literally feel a soft wind blowing across my ear and gently tugging at the ends of my hair. But strangely, there was no sound of wind blowing through the tree leaves to accompany it. The only noise I could hear was the soft crunching of last year's leaves beneath my shoes. And worst of all of this was the fact I actually didn't know how long it had been since it had gone quiet like this. I didn't even know how long I'd been standing there. It was at this moment that I remembered one of the common wilderness aphorisms that basically says, "The forest only goes quiet when it's trying not to be eaten," implying the presence of some apex predator nearby. I let out a soft laugh. I'd always thought that idea was sort of silly, given that humans are one of, if not the apex predator in virtually every environment we've settled. So of course the forest would go quiet when we're around. Obviously, there's an apex predator in the woods. I am the apex predator around here. Still chuckling at myself for walking into a forest, disturbing the wildlife, and then getting scared when the wildlife reacted to me, I figured I'd settle my nerves a bit more with a second smoke before heading back to the porch to meet Altan. I reached into my pocket, grabbed my lighter, flipped open the top, and pinched a cigarette between my lips as I lifted the lighter up to my face. As I flicked the spark wheel, the flame briefly illuminated the woods around me, and I instantly froze. In the split second of light between me sparking the wheel and the sparks snuffing out in the air, I saw a face in the darkness no more than half a meter from my own. I could have reached out and touched it, and I felt this spike of nausea as my brain tried to process what I had just seen. It was human. I just saw a naked human. Was that my imagination? No way. I've never experienced hallucinations before. That was real. Oh my god. There's a naked human right there. I had frozen in place so quickly I hadn't even depressed the lever on my lighter, so the sparks disappeared almost instantly, leaving my smoke unlit and me in total darkness. I don't know if you've ever been caught completely off guard in a potentially dangerous situation before, but it's interesting how your mind works in those situations. My brain kicked into high gear, frantically trying to process what I'd seen and what I should do next. Was someone out here in the mountains? Were they lost? Maybe they'd seen the porch lights in the distance and were stumbling towards it for help? But why couldn't I hear them approach, though? Why couldn't I hear anything right now? The flash of light was so fast, if there was someone there, they were probably just as surprised and flash-blinded as I was. Hell, they probably didn't know I was here since I'd been standing still. But again, why hadn't I heard them approach? Despite only standing there for a few seconds, the thoughts tumbling through my brain in a chaotic race to come up with something, I felt the pressure growing to do something, anything. I was hesitant to light my lighter again, but I figured I had to make sure I wasn't seeing things, and if I wasn't, I needed to know what I was dealing with. So I decided to act natural, like that would do anything, and just pretend I hadn't seen anything at all. It's honestly kind of funny thinking about it looking back. It's so weird what our minds decide is rational when we're blindsided by something. But I raised the lighter back to my face and lit my smoke like nothing had happened. Any sense of rationalization or any notion of humor looking back ended the second I hit my lighter with that second strike. That thing was entirely real. Not a hallucination, not pareidolia in the shadows, not a trick of the light, nor a lost person stumbling through the woods. Not human. For another briefest of moments, I saw the slim, maybe 2 meters tall figure of a man or woman, or at least what looked like a man or woman. I'm honestly not sure which, looking down at me from over their shoulder as they were caught mid-stride stepping back behind a tree. The flare of light dimmed out just before I could make out the facial features, but it was without a doubt the same thing I'd seen just moments before, though now several meters farther and clearly trying to hide. And I still hadn't heard anything. I gasped in shock and realized that my second strike on the lighter had lit my smoke as the lit cherry on my cigarette brightened for a second as I gasped. It illuminated the forest around me just enough to reveal that same humanoid figure cast in red-orange light between the trees in front of me, now standing full profile. I could barely see the figure between drags on my cigarette, as they were just at the very edge of the dim light my cigarette gave. I honestly don't know why I didn't think to use my lighter again, but in the moment, I was so afraid it just didn't cross my mind. I tried my best to look at its face or any identifying features between puffs on my smoke, but it was too dim to make much out. All I could tell was it was bald and naked, standing completely motionless just 2 or 3 meters away from me, and it only ever seems to move when the light wasn't on it. My brain scrambled for a response again. Should I talk to him, her, it? No, this is too dangerous. I should turn back now and get my phone and call the police. Someone alone? Naked in a forest? Now, whoever this is, they've definitely got mental issues. Who knows what he would try and do if I tried to interact with him. Let's play this safe. I slowly backed away, drawing comfort from the intense darkness around me and knowing he really wouldn't have any idea where I was going until... Shit. The sudden realization set in that he'd been looking at me the whole time, because of my lit smoke. Of course he can fucking see me. I quickly put out the cigarette and turned 180 degrees to head straight for the house. I tried to walk as quietly as possible, but the dry leaves crunching under my feet were the only noise I could still hear and were making it impossible to be sneaky. Fuck it, I'm running. I propelled myself forward as fast as I could, and I'd barely taken 2 steps before my adrenaline-fueled dash face-planted me directly into a tree. Great. I instantly felt a burst of warmth running on my lips and chin and tasted iron. I was bleeding from my nose, hard, and I'd be lucky if I hadn't broken it outright. Yeah, great idea running full tilt through a dark forest like a moron. Let's take this easy. The house isn't that far, and the lights should be visible in just a few meters. Pulling myself up, I stepped around the tree and slowly walked towards the house. My 2 arms stretched outward this time to hopefully prevent another woody surprise. I continued walking for the better part of a minute. Huh. Weird, I didn't walk that far. I should be able to see the porch light. Please don't tell me they turned off the light. Trying to calm myself down from the rising waves of panic washing over me, I continued forward. As long as he's not following you, everything is good. You know he's not following you because you don't hear any leaves crunching except from your own steps. But the feeling, the strong feeling of being watched kept me on edge, my positive self-talk doing about as good as it normally does. No matter how far I walked, I felt like this thing was still lurking exactly 3 meters behind me and looking at me, just like it was before. I continued walking, and did I lose my sense of direction? I turned exactly at 180 degrees. I should have been inside my house minutes ago, let alone have seen the light or stepped into the yard or crossed the road. Maybe these damned trees made me lose my sense of direction, but no, I shouldn't have had to walk more than 10 or 20 seconds before seeing the light, regardless. After over 5 minutes of this, I still felt like I was being watched. I hadn't heard any footsteps at all, though, except for my own, and I figured it would help me calm my nerves and think rationally if I could prove he wasn't there. So I checked my pockets and pulled out my lighter, relieved I hadn't dropped it in the chaos. I didn't bother with another cigarette this time. I honestly just wanted to get home and thought I needed a little bit of light to help orient myself and make sure this person wasn't still there. Oh God, he's still there. When I sparked my lighter, for a split second I saw that same thing standing exactly the same distance away from me as it was before. It startled me so much that I dropped my lighter, my heart skipping several beats as my chest collapsed in this cold, sharp, stinging pain. How is he following me? He can't see me. Maybe these damn leaves. But why isn't he making sound too if he's walking right behind me? Is he floating? A ghost? Demon? What the hell? I wanted to make him go away at this point, scream at him, charge him, but I was just too afraid. Exerting my last thread of control over the sheer terror I felt, I crouched down and felt around the ground to get my lighter. I couldn't find it. Too many leaves. Then my hand closed around something cold and hard. Standing up, I realized it wasn't my lighter, but it was a rock. I hesitated as I considered my next steps. I didn't want to throw it at him. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted to get home and this thing to leave me alone. But this thing had been following me, and I had no idea what its intentions were, and if it kept following me, I could only imagine things would get worse. So I wound up, shot, and I threw that rock as hard as I could. There were a few moments of silence before I heard the soft thud of the rock landing in the leaf litter off behind him. Clearly, I'd missed. So I grabbed another rock and threw it as well. Missed. Third time. Missed. I considered bending down for a fourth rock when I felt the wind that had been blowing into my face come to a complete stop. Only my hands could still feel the wind from the front, almost as if something was blocking the... Then I felt the wind return. But this time it was warm and moist. Something, no, that thing was standing right in front of me, inches away, blocking the wind, breathing into my face. I was frozen in fear and stood there for God knows how long, not moving a muscle. And that thing, too, didn't move a muscle. The only proof I had of it still being there was the steady rhythm of its breath on my face. What if I touch this thing? What if I punch it real hard? Will it go away? This is a really dumb idea. Not even a horror movie character would try something this stupid. But what else am I supposed to do? Clearly trying to run from it didn't do anything, and standing here sure as hell won't fuck it. So out of a fusion of desperation and terror and maybe even morbid curiosity, I wound up and took a swing at it. It wasn't a particularly hard swing. I was stiff from standing there, and the adrenaline that had been coursing through me for so long without an outlet was starting to make my muscles sore. And honestly, my fear was holding me back from really letting loose like I wanted to. None of that really matters though, because as I swung out, my fist collided with nothing but the cool mountain air, and I instantly felt the wind blowing on my face again. I was relieved, if you could call it that, but I still felt the strong sense of being watched. Not wanting to question what might be my first lucky break since the whole ordeal had started, though, I turned around and started walking slowly in the same direction I'd been moving. Then the wind behind me stopped blowing, only to be shortly replaced by warm, moist air on the back of my neck. I'm not religious, but I started praying to every god's name I know of, wishing this whole thing would just turn out to be some crazy imagination. My stomach tied itself into an even deeper knot, and I felt that nausea come rushing back. Then that thing tugged at my hair. I let out the loudest scream I never even imagined I could make. I started swinging wildly in every direction, just punching everything, each punch meeting empty air. Terror completely took control at this point, and I darted off in a random direction before smashing face first into another tree. Too afraid to even feel the pain at this point, I tried to climb it, but the branches kept snapping off. I held one of the branches as hard as I could, and I just started flailing wildly in every direction as I continued running randomly through the forest. I'm honestly not sure how much time passed like this, but it felt like forever. Eventually, though, my adrenaline finally began to run out, and I could feel exhaustion start to set in. My fist started throbbing, and I could feel cool blood drying on my knuckles. I realized I was still holding a piece of that stick I'd broken off, and I must have punched some trees or broken the rest of the stick off while I'd been flailing around like crazy. Completely broken at this point, I dropped to my knees and burst into tears crying, hoping and praying the sun would come soon. I started crawling on all fours towards I don't even know what, for I don't even know how long, before I just collapsed and lied in the fetal position. I woke up to a sharp, stinging pain. I blinked my eyes, worlds coming into focus around me. I was back in the house, lying on the couch. My grandparents were looking down at me, worried, and they were surrounded by, is that a doctor and the police? The memories from the night before came flooding back all at once, and I shot up from my back in a jolt of energy, fear, and relief. Thank God they'd found me. Startled but relieved I'd woken up so quickly, they asked if someone had attacked me and what had happened the night before. I told them everything, the words tumbling out in a chaotic but mostly understandable mess. They stared dumbfounded as I spoke, a stunned silence hanging in the room when I was finished. The doctor broke it by asking me if I had been on any medications or perhaps had had a bit too much alcohol. The question made me mad, and I turned to him, told him I'd had 2 small cans of beer last night with a full dinner, and it wasn't enough to get anyone buzzed, let alone drunk. No, I was sober the whole time. Then one of the police officers turned to me and said something that explained the doctor's suggestion and shook me to my core. Sir, there's no forest around here. Not a single tree. I stared at him, not fully understanding what he had just said. Where did you find me then? Your grandparents found you outside, just a few feet away from the house. I shot up off the couch and ran outside to see for myself, to try and reconcile what they'd just said with what I'd experienced. And to my shock, not only was there not a single tree in sight, there was a huge fence, topped with barbed wire, surrounding the entire house and my grandparents' property. My grandparents followed me outside and gestured down to the place where they'd found me in front of the front porch. You were here in the yard the whole time, son. We got up last night after we figured Altan had picked you up and locked the gate. We were sure you'd already left. I was dumbfounded, again, as what they said sunk in. They were right. Even if I had somehow wandered outside of the gate last night. If they would have locked me out, there's no way I could have climbed the fence without the barbed wire completely shredding me and my clothes. And that's if I was able to climb the wall in the first place. Still standing there, completely dumbfounded, my grandmother turned to me. You've been clutching something in your hand, son. We were trying to clean it up and open it when you woke up. What is it? I looked down at my hand and more memories flooded back from the night before. My fist was red, swollen and bruised, with dried blood covering my knuckles and seeping up from in between my fingers. It was the piece of tree branch that I'd grabbed last night. I hadn't even realized I'd been holding it this whole time. I was holding it so hard it had cut into my hand and the blood had hardened, more or less gluing it to my skin and locking my hand in a fist around it. I looked up in vindication, dread, confusion. Wait a minute, this is the tree branch I snapped off. There's gotta be a tree around here. And if I was here the whole time, my cigarette and lighter have to be around here somewhere too. Fueled by a newfound sense of urgency to prove I wasn't completely insane, I took off into a run, frantically looking for a tree or a lighter somewhere, anywhere in the yard. I lapped the house 3 times in desperation before my grandpa finally stopped me. Look, you're a bloody mess right now. Get inside and get treated first, have some breakfast, then look around as long as you want for your lighter or this tree. I didn't have the will to argue with him at this point. With my mind even more stunned and confused than any time up to this point, food and a shower were, honestly, probably the best things for me right now. So I went inside and they asked me a bunch of questions, like if I remembered someone attacking me or if I had a history of hallucinating. The doctor took a look at my hand and said that my fist was busted from punching a hard object, and despite insisting I had no history of it, that maybe I'd just had a spell of bad hallucinations. He also said that my face seemed like I got punched in the nose. I told him that I'd run face first into a tree twice, and he laughed it off, saying maybe I'd just run into one of the walls surrounding my grandparents' property. After cleaning the blood off my hand, he wrapped it gently and told me to come get it checked out with an x-ray to make sure I didn't need surgery or anything, but that overall it looked like it would be alright, at least for the time being. With the police comfortable that no crime had happened and the doctor now assured I wasn't in any urgent danger, they all went on their way. I sat there on the couch in front of my room with my grandparents, just shocked at the whole ordeal. My grandparents were kind of skeptical and asked me to tell them what had happened again. So I told my story one more time. Like I said, they were somewhat skeptical. I mean, to be fair, it would be really hard to believe me in the first place, but one thing that did make them believe me a little bit more was the small piece of wood I'd been holding, and that I couldn't have gone past the locked gate, and that my lighter was nowhere to be seen in their open yard, and that when they had gone out to lock the gate, they didn't see or hear me anywhere in their yard. I guess, except for the tree branch, each piece of information individually might be easy enough to explain away, but when considered all together, I think my grandparents came to the uncomfortable conclusion that something very weird had happened last night, even if they couldn't explain it. After I showered and calmed down some, I called Altan to explain what had happened and apologize for not meeting him. He was super mad for not picking up his calls, and rightly so. He drove 2 hours in the middle of the night, then waited for me for over an hour more to respond to his calls and give him directions for the final part of the trip. I apologized and told him about last night's event. He said it was the lamest excuse he had ever heard and hung up on me. My grandparents drove me to my home in Ulaanbaatar later that afternoon, and by the time we got there, it was about to get dark. I became super paranoid and rushed inside and turned on all the lights immediately. Even when I went to bed that night, I couldn't even consider trying to sleep without the lights on. It honestly felt, and feels, like if it's even slightly dark, that thing would come out at any moment, like it's watching me from somewhere, waiting. I'm honestly completely terrified of the darkness now, and it's honestly to the point that it's crippling. A few weeks after the event, I'd talked to Altan and convinced him that I really was sorry about what had happened, and he'd calmed down enough to at least believe that I was sorry, even if he didn't believe me about what had happened. So I was finally at his house and planning on staying the night for the first time since I'd returned to Mongolia. It was about time to sleep, and I was in the kitchen drinking water before bed. He came to the kitchen, grabbed some snacks, and was about to flip the light switch off as he walked out, before heading to bed himself. A bit frantic, I called out to him, "Hey, leave the lights on, you know the story I told you, right?" He rolled his eyes a bit, snorted a whatever, and turned the lights off before leaving the room. I just froze as he went on to his room. I couldn't speak, I couldn't call out to him. Tears running down my cheeks, I could barely even breathe as I collapsed into this full-blown panic attack. I was catatonic. I just slowly crouched down and lied sideways again in the fetal position on the floor. It was terrifying, and it went on forever. I don't know if you've ever been too afraid to sleep, like, not in a little kid way, but actually been afraid you were in extreme danger. This was like that. Like there was a lion around the corner, and all it had to do was turn the corner to see me, and that was it. And I just sat there, terrified like that, incapable of moving. Finally, I could see the dark sky getting the slightest bit brighter through the kitchen window. Nothing close to sunrise, just slightly lighter than before. An hour or so later, I heard Altan stirring. He came out of his room and into the kitchen when he accidentally stepped on me. "Oh, shit. What the fuck are you doing on the ground? Go sleep on the couch." I couldn't reply. It was still dark. "Shit, man. Are you okay? Should I call a doctor?" Still, I couldn't respond. It was still dark. He scrambled for the light switch to try and see what was going on and make sure I was okay, and finally turned on the light. Are you okay? What's happening? Do you need a doctor? Should I call an ambulance?" Finally free from being paralyzed, I slowly sat up. My legs and back, hell, my entire body stiff from laying perfectly still on the tile all night. "Yeah, man, maybe tomorrow. I'm so tired right now. Please don't turn off the lights next time." He then finally understood how serious I was about what I had experienced. The next few weeks were uneventful. Altan felt truly horrible about the situation moving forward, apologizing many times that he truly had no idea how terrified of the dark I was, that I was always the kid who was perfectly fine in the dark, and he was sorry for not believing me sooner. My grandparents were, and still are, confused about the event, but mostly moved on with their lives, and I tried to as well. At least, the best that I could. I didn't have any incidents with the lights or power going out, and I was sure to buy an array of battery-operated flashlights just to be safe in case the power did go out one night. I also held on to that broken piece of stick for a few more weeks. I hoped it would help me find some answers to the incident, but the longer I kept it, it felt like this piece of wood was a bad omen or like a cursed object. I've never been religious or superstitious, but something about this little stick piece felt wrong. Like something that doesn't belong here, or something that wanted me back there. So eventually I just threw it away. I still question what that entire ordeal in a forest that doesn't exist was all about. Researching the topic later, I found there hasn't been a forest in this part of Mongolia since the reign of Genghis Khan, about 800 years ago. So, where was I? How was I in a forest? Where is that forest now? Was it all hallucinations? Did I go back in time? To another dimension? Teleportation? If I was hallucinating, how did I get this piece of wood? What was that thing I saw in the forest? The forest that doesn't exist? Some deranged, scrawny human? How did he get there? An alien? A ghost then? What did he want? What did it want? And how did I end up back in front of my grandparents' house? How did my grandparents not see or hear me if I truly had been there in their yard the whole time? Where the hell did I drop my lighter? Why isn't my lighter in their yard? Is it still in the woods? It must still be in those woods. In the ghost woods of Mongolia.